This is the Biz News Podcast, one-on-one conversations with experts in business and personal development.
Dale Carnegie called it human engineering. Some call it manipulation. But Brian Ahearn says it's learning how to ethically influence people. He says the ability to ethically influence people is a skill anyone can learn, practice, and perfect. Mr. Ahearn, who's the Chief Influence Officer at the firm Influence People in Columbus, Ohio, specializes in applying the science of influence in everyday business situations. He joins us for this Biz News Interview podcast to tell us more. What on earth is a Chief Influence Officer?
It is my responsibility, Doug, to influence people to say, we would like to hire you, Brian.
They used to call that the VP of sales.
I teach people about ethical influence, and influence goes much broader than simply selling. And my definition of selling, Doug, is I know some people will say we're always selling, but I really look at selling as a transaction where there's an exchange of value for goods or services. But influence is a lot broader than that. We are trying to influence people all the time. And so I thought, my company is Influence People. It would be only right to be the chief influence officer of the company.
Well, that's very good. But let's talk about influence, because it is bandied about these days. You hear about these young people who are influencers on, say, YouTube or TikTok or something like that. Are we talking about that?
No, we're not talking about that. We all have a degree of influence. In fact, there's a lady, Vanessa Bonds, a PhD up in Canada, who wrote a book called You Have More Influence Than You Think. We all exert some amount of influence by merely being present. People will pay attention for any number of reasons. It could be what we're wearing, but they will pay attention. So an influencer, yes, getting online and then promoting where they go, they get followers, they are certainly influencing. What I talk about is the science of influence. What does research from social psychology and behavioral economics have to say about how we can do a better job of influencing people? And there are people, Doug, who might be wildly successful in life, but may do things that could be so much better if they understood the science. And so that's what I try to help individuals and organizations understand. What does the research say? How do you bring it into your daily activities so you can hear yes more and enjoy the fruits that come with that?
Are you talking about manipulating people?
No, manipulation, and it's a great question. First of all, let me share a story. If it were not for the word manipulation, I would not be doing what I do today. When I came across Robert Cialdini's material nearly 20 years ago, I was so intrigued by it because, one, it was research-based. Two, I was involved with sales. It explained the psychology of why certain sales approaches work and certain don't. And he was very clear on his stance on ethics, that you could do this in a non-manipulative way. The video that I saw was from Stanford. So I signed up for Stanford's marketing, and one day one of their flyers came across my desk, and it said in bold letters, it had his picture, bold letters, bestseller, right underneath it in bold letters, call it influence, persuasion, or even manipulation. And I thought, I can't believe they actually use that word, because he's so clear about non-manipulative ways to move people to action. So I guess I'll say the moral part of me felt like it needed to be addressed. So I emailed Stanford and I said, I don't know anybody who wants to be manipulated, and I don't know anybody who's looking to become a manipulator. The word cannot be helping your sales, but it's probably really, really hurting. I never heard from Stanford, but sometime later, Dr. Robert Cialdini's office called me, one of his representatives, and she said, I am calling to thank you on behalf of Dr. Cialdini because you sent an email to Stanford and they're changing the marketing of all of our materials because of your email. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. We had this nice conversation. And by the end, she said, if your company is ever looking for a speaker, he travels the world to talk about this. And I said, you know what? I sit next to the woman who plans our events and books our speakers. Let me transfer you. And as fate would have it, summer of 2004, Robert Cialdini was in Columbus, Ohio several times to address the insurance agents at the company that I worked for. And I ultimately became certified, and the rest is history. But that one decision to take a stance on manipulation changed the course of my career and the course of my life. So I am very adamant that you can influence people. And I always talk about ethical influence, and that's very different than manipulation. So that's my story. What questions does that arise?
Well, for one thing, please define for us in real life terms, what do you mean by the ethical influence?
Okay. To be an ethical influencer, there are 3 must-haves. First, truthfulness. It's not just telling the truth. We never hide the truth. If you and I are interacting for a product or service, whatever it may be, my sharing the truth isn't enough if I'm withholding something that I believe would materially impact your decision. Because if you find out and you say, Brian, why didn't you tell me? For me to say, well, Doug, you didn't ask, is not defensible. Okay. So truthfulness. Second thing, we only use the psychology that is naturally present in the situation. In other words, I don't claim a false scarcity, which is really lying too, but I don't use the psychology in a manipulative way. I don't claim that something's running out when it's not. I don't claim that lots of people are doing something, social proof, if they're not. So I only use the psychology that is naturally available. And then the third thing that we do, Doug, is we always make sure that it's mutually beneficial. It's not enough. I probably have a vested interest in getting you to say yes. Could be my job, could be commission. But what I put out has to be good for you as well as me. And I like to say it this way: good for you, good for me, then we're good to go. If we have all 3 of those, then I think that we can feel good about how we're interacting with people.
How on earth do you do it in a practical one-on-one, this is happening right now, this instance, way of doing it? Because much of what you're saying indicates you have to do an awful lot of research before you get to that point.
Well, absolutely. But Aristotle put it well when he said character may almost be called the most effective means of persuasion. If we have deeply internalized this, then it's not hard for me to be truthful. As if I learn the psychology, it's easy for me to see where it's naturally available. And if I am an ethical person and I really am applying the psychology the way that I should, then I want you to walk away from this transaction happy. So those 3 criteria just become who I am. I don't have to think a whole lot about that. It's just emanating from my character. The rest of it, yes, if you and I were going to sit down to potentially negotiate some kind of deal, I would do a lot of research. I'd want to know as much as I could about you so that I could maybe tap into the principle of liking, that if I want to engage reciprocity, I know how to give to you in the ways that are most beneficial. If I am going to invoke any type of social proof, I know who other people who are like you or like your organization that I can bring in. So yes, I invest time, and I use that term invest because if I do it well, I'm going to reap a much greater return on the time that I put in there.
Let's move to the 2 things that humans do best, we think. One of which, of course, is talking, but the other is listening. And everybody says, well, I'm a good listener. Are they?
I don't think most people are, because I think most people confuse hearing with listening. And hearing is simply to be aware of the sounds by the ear. 2 people can sit in the same conference. One person walks away and says, wow, that was amazing. The other person doesn't remember much of anything. They both took information in through their ears, but one person listened. And listening is an active skill as opposed to hearing, which is very passive. And when I talk to people about listening, I always share a 5-step model on how to be what I call listening stars. And the word stars is an acronym to simply stop what you're doing, focus on tone of voice, because it indicates mood quite often, ask clarifying questions, restate your understanding, and scribble means take notes. So I think if everybody focused on those 5 things, just stop to give full attention, tried to pay attention to tone to discern where somebody's coming from emotionally, asking questions to make sure you're on the same page, and then at the end restating what you believe that person has shared with you the whole while you were taking notes, I think we would do a much, much better job of having good communications with people.
For years, Brian, people have said, well, he's a good salesperson, but he's not a closer. And some companies would send in person number 2 to close the deal. How do you move people from listening to you and understanding what you have to say to actually putting their name on the bottom line?
Well, the number one question I would get asked when I was working with independent insurance agents and I was putting on multi-day workshops, inevitably the number one question asked was, what's the best way to close? Because that's, I think, where people are naturally getting stuck. But I think, and I would tell them, the best way to close is the moment that you meet somebody, you look them in the eye and you shake their hand. Everything builds off of that. If you start doing that well, that's the foundation of everything else. Then you use the psychology that I teach to inform them into yes. You're not trying to get someone to buy. You're trying to take whatever your product or service is and talk about it in a way that is most compelling, so people start naturally saying, yeah, I want to do business. I didn't understand this before. I want to do business with you. When it comes to closing, yes, there is some psychology that it makes it easier if you're tapping into it along the way. And one of those things is consistency. If I ask the right questions early on, to get you, Doug, to verbalize what it is that you're looking for in this potential transaction, then when I get to the close, I can refer back to that. I can say, you know, Doug, when we first met, you told me that we needed to do A, B, and C. And I really believe we've done A, B, and C, and we've done a couple things more than what you asked for. Is there any reason that we can't go ahead and just start working on the paperwork now? It can be that easy, because you will probably act in alignment with what you've already said that you want. That's a strong driver of human behavior. And if we tap into it ethically early on, that's what makes closing much, much easier.
You mentioned 5 steps to more effective listening. You also have a couple of magic words, maybe more than a couple. What are these magic words?
Well, one of the words that I talk about a lot is the word because. When you use the word because, one particular study showed that you can sometimes get as much as 50% more compliance when using the word because. And part of the rationale that social psychologists believe is behind that is because we are conditioned by it from childhood. Now, I'm sure that people who are watching or listening to this can remember times or multiple times when they were young and mom or dad told them to do something. And if they ever dared say why, mom or dad probably said, because I said so, right? And we didn't say, well, wait a minute, mom, dad, that's not a valid reason. We just did it. And so the theory is we're so conditioned by that when we're interacting with people and we say because and we give a reason, it's a trigger for them to just kind of fall into line and do what we want. Now, I don't advocate bogus reasons. What I tell people is when you understand this, whatever it is that you may be asking of another person, say because and give a reason. That will increase your odds of hearing yes and getting them to do what you want. So that is one of those magic words that I think if we tap into, it will make it much easier for people to say yes to us.
Brian, you're the author of a number of books, and another one has just come out. Would you tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about it?
Sure. The most recent book that I wrote came out in December of 2021, and it's called The Influencer: Secrets to Success and Happiness. And I wrote the book because my first book, Influence People, is a heavy business psychology book. The second book is Persuasive Selling, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's about sales. And knowing that there are some people who will never pick up a sales book or a book that's heavy on the business psychology, during the pandemic, I thought, could I possibly write a story, a business parable to teach this psychology. And that was the impetus for the book. I'd read many business parables, and I thought, can I do that? So I sat down and started writing this book about a young man named John Andrews. And you literally meet the guy when he's born, and you see that he's nothing extraordinary. He's got no natural advantages over you or me or just about anybody else. He's a very ordinary middle-class American kid. And you go off to college with him, he learns a little psychology, but when he gets into his career, he begins to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And he's learning from mentors and clients and coaches and other people. And he starts formulating this view of life based on what he's learning about influence. And so it was just a different way to teach about this psychology. And it was a blast to write it. I'd never written anything like that. And it's gotten really, really good feedback.
And you have another book in the pipeline?
Well, I'm actively working on a book, not related to influence, but it's about my relationship with my father. My dad passed away about a year and a half ago. He had served in the Marines. And as I tell people, when you serve in the Marines, in some ways you're changed for the good, in some ways you're changed for the bad. There are pros and cons. And it can be difficult, I think, for somebody to be a child of a Marine, be married to a Marine. And so the book is, tentatively, I'm calling it, His Story is My Story, because of the struggles that he and I had as I became a young man, and I wanted answers to certain things, and he didn't want to go there all the time. And so we really kind of battled, but we got to a good place well before the time of his passing. And I thought, if I can write a book that shows the journey that we took, it might help another Marine make a different choice. Maybe it is to open up, try to open up. It might make a difference for the people who are in the life of that Marine, that, hey, you know, Dad's not just a jerk or something like that, but maybe we need to try to understand what he's gone through so that we can get closer. And so that's the big project that I'm working on now.
Brian, you've given us an awful lot to chew over after we conclude this. What do you like to add, though, that we haven't had a chance to talk about?
Well, one of the principles that I teach is called liking. And when I talk about the principle of liking, we all know that it's easier for people to say yes to us if they know us and they like us, right? And it's not that hard to get people to like you. Most of us, if we really think about it, we know that we could connect on what we have in common. If we find out we cheer for the same team, you start naturally liking people. Or if we pay a compliment, somebody's going to think, oh, that was nice, and they'll like you more. But the key for the principle is never that I would try to get you, for example, Doug, to like me. It's about me coming to like you. And so therefore, I want to connect on what we have in common, because I know that I'll like you more if I find out we cheer for the same team or something. I want to find the good things in you and praise them, because it will make me think more highly of you. And the reason this is so important is when you sense that I truly like you, you become much more open to whatever I might ask. But because I have come to know and like you, I want the best for you. And so we've created what I call a virtuous cycle, where I'm putting forth what I really believe is the best for you based on what I now know about you and because I like you, and you're receiving it that way. And it's no longer a transactional just piece of business. It's about, I want to help the people that I know and like. That's how we form the basis of long-lasting relationships. And if I do that well, then all of this other psychology that I teach becomes so much more natural to invoke, and it all but removes manipulation from the equation. So that's what I would like people to recognize, and that's what I try to really emphasize in my books.
In the time we have left, you must have a website, I would bet. What would that be?
It is influencepeople.biz, B-I-Z. So just one word, influencepeople.biz. And if people go there, I've been blogging weekly for almost 14 years, so hundreds and hundreds of articles. Been a guest on nearly 150 podcasts. They're all cataloged. I've got preview videos, links to my books, offerings that I have. So tremendous amount of information there.
You've been watching the Biz News Podcast. We welcome your input. Send your email to editor@biznews.com. Thanks for watching.